Am I taking this one, Benny? Normally you
Yeah,
start us
please.
off.
No, you're good. Go for it. Take it.
Welcome to the Ramey and Benny podcast. We are in our episode. What number are we at? 19, 20?
19.
Number 19, episode number 19, and we have a very, very special guest with us today. So I'm going to jump right in and introduce Bob Nelkin. Bob Nelkin retired in 2019 after a 50-year career advocating for children, people with disabilities, seniors, and families in need. Known as a fearless change agent, Bob helped shape state and local policy, always grounded in research and best practices. He inspired others to speak out against injustice and led efforts that improved services and support systems for the most vulnerable. Bob has held several leadership roles across government, academia, nonprofits, the business sector. I'll just give you a quick sampling, go through the whole resume, but executive assistant to the chair of the Allegheny County Board of Commissioners, director of human services for Allegheny County, director of policy initiatives at the University of Pittsburgh's Office of Child Development, executive director of the Governor's Commission for Children and Families, and I think most recently, president and CEO of the United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania. So thank you for joining us today, Bob.
Absolutely.
Really, really nice to have you here.
My mother wrote that.
I was thinking of what to ask you first, and I decided, you know what, I'm not going to give you any softballs to start us off. I'm gonna ask you some big ones right off the bat here. So you've had a long, illustrious career, helping all sorts of people and demographics facing injustice. If you had to pick one, what would you say was your superpower as a nonprofit professional? Fundraising, allocations of resources, leadership, motivating a team. What made you so good at your jobs over these years?
I think a fierceness about pursuit of justice, not being impeded by all sorts of challenges, and knowing that having a belief about what is right and then pursuing it to the nth degree.
Where did that come from?
That was probably a maladjustment from childhood.
Nice. That's a great answer.
What happened to you? What happened to you that made you like this, Bob? What happened to you?
You know, I think this is relevant to some people involved in nonprofit or government, and that is an empathy score that's off the charts. As a young person, I remember empathy in elementary school situations and high school situations. And then you start reading in high school about man's inhumanity to man. Ninth grade, Miss Sinkus, Alderdice High School. And you start saying, well, that's not right. How do I fix that? What would I do in my life to change that? And then one thing leads to the next, where you're challenged with things that are immoral or unjust. And then you decide, okay, well, why is everyone else not fighting this? Who are the people who are working on this? And dedicate yourself to that.
It's interesting because both government and nonprofits are places where change is notoriously slow. And I imagine that it's hard for someone that has so much fierceness or passion, as you call it, to be patient as that change unfolds. But you were able to do that over decades.
Yeah, I think that's, again, the maladjustment, the personality flaw. Probably the best example was early 1970s. I had a group of volunteers from what was then called the Irene Kaufman Center who were working with children with disabilities, and the children were excluded from public school. Somebody said, take your volunteers to the state institution. It's called Western State School and Hospital. And I went there, and that day I saw inhumanity like I couldn't believe in the city of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania in the United States, 1971, I think it was. Just the neglect, the abandonment, the abuse, the lack of care, people naked in the room without adult supervision, sitting in their urine and feces, self-stimulating, no education, no training. Okay, so now what do you do? I went back to my boss and I said, I can't do the recreation and volunteer programs anymore. I've seen something that is so bad that we've got to change that. And so we started a group of, I worked as a staff person with a group of moms of children with disabilities. We started going unannounced, this is relevant to your question, to the state institutions, and one of them is called Polk State School and Hospital, and 3,200 people, the 100 and some people in a bedroom, and all the atrocities. And we went to the superintendent's office unannounced. We didn't want some sort of tour, and said, we want to see this ward, a back ward. Well, it's our policy. You're not allowed to go to the back ward. Why do you think you're entitled to go to the back ward? And eventually they would relent. We might threaten to go to federal court. And then we would expose these horrendous conditions. So what happened at that moment of engagement where we walked into the office of this very powerful person representing this very powerful organization, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and said, no, you can't deny us. And you've denied the parents. They can't go back there. You've denied other advocates. But we want to see. And then once you start seeing things, including January 1973, people in cages, and start exposing that to the public and to the elected officials, et cetera. So I don't know that I answered your question, but when you're confronted, when you get to pushback, you have a choice. And if you're determined, you can press forward and maybe make changes.
And on the other side of that, when you saw things and then either you couldn't make the change or other people were in position to do something and didn't, did it drive you crazy?
It just motivated me more.
Motivated you more.
Yeah, I think at the heart of it, and this is a question no matter whether you're trying to reverse 50 years of inhumanity or whether it's something small. When people see something that's wrong, the question is, what do they do? And I always sorted this into three different things. So you see somebody bullying somebody else. Let's just take that as an example. You, A, ignore it, walk by, don't get involved. And B, you justify it. Oh, they had it coming to them. Or C, you stand up for what's right and against what's wrong. And I think at the heart of nonprofit justice, knowing you have to do the third thing, you have to stand up and you have to be willing to take the consequences.
Is that mainly because, like, in my experience, is not like that one, the examples that you share, but I'm curious, is it mainly because most people don't and someone has to, and so that has to be you? Or, like, there's most of the time with most of the problems and most of the places, most of the people don't do anything, right? So, like, what's that? So the drive is still that fierceness that you mentioned before, but I'm curious, like you just felt there's a void and I have to do this?
Yeah, so why were we the people who demanded to get through this wall? Why were we the people who saw things and then made the public through the news media and government officials aware of it? Why were we the ones, and ask the question differently? Why didn't the other people, all the professionals who worked in the institutions, the families, the local business people, the Chamber of Commerce, the legislators? And there's a variety of answers. I mean, self-interest, um, sense of futility, etc. Again, I think probably a maladjustment on my part said, wait, we can be the ones to make these changes. And that example is just one example. I think there are tamer situations, less inhumane, but where you have to distinguish yourself and say, I'm going to be the person, or we're going to be the people, or our nonprofit is going to be the one that distinguishes itself, that does what others can't do, won't do, et cetera.
But organizing that and implementing that takes more than that passion, right? Then you have to organize. Then you have to set out a plan and execute. And I think that's what probably stops a lot of people from taking action, is that not knowing how to do it, or I don't know, the fear of trying in the first place. But to go and to organize and then take action on it is a tremendous thing.
Yeah, so I have to admit that none of this was planned. My career wasn't planned. The situations I encountered that we changed. weren't planned. I'm not saying there wasn't planning along the way. When I got into more of the professional leadership, executive directors, jobs, yeah, there's a lot of planning, a lot of foresight. But I think the nonprofit entities that are trying to pursue justice, a lot of it is being open to what is hurting people and to then study and understand why that's happened and how to alleviate it, or better yet, how to prevent it.
How did you get people then to join your side of it when they were either ambivalent, uninterested? Like how did you grow that community or that group of support that's going to join you in some sort of I know it wasn't the career is not planned, but ultimately there's some strategic skill involved. And so what was that? How did that go for you?
That's where I probably wish I hadn't been a college dropout and had studied psychology. I learned it along the way. This is all about human behavior. No matter whether it's the defenders of the institution or the people who work there but really do want to change, the family members, who, because of they were told at the time, place your child in this institution, and they were told you can't go back and see what the conditions are. So I think that's when you really start thinking, well, and you think the best of people, what do they really want that isn't happening? And then how do I help them think, well, we can change that? So some of it is creating possibility, in their mind. Some of it is raising some criticism about what's happening, which is really hard for people to take. But it's realizing that people basically want something better, but don't know how to do it. And you can offend them so much that they will just fight you, which we did a lot of. Or you can find ways to say, "No, come on, work with me. We can make some things happen." I think with the families of individuals who were institutionalized or excluded from public school, we sued the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and all the school districts because they excluded people with disabilities. And if you think of what the real origin of that change was, and that became, by the way, a national model. Pennsylvania became a national model for educating all children. It was getting close to the family members and seeing their hurts and their needs. They just 24/7 had to take care of individuals, sometimes with very complex disabilities. And everyone else is going to school. The government is taking care of all other children, but not these children. Is that right? No. So I think understanding that human need and putting that out in front of policymakers and media and influencers so that other people can be empathetic and other people can get on board. I'm not sure I answered your question well.
It's a good answer.
Very good answer. Very good answer. You've worked in nonprofits, in the government space, academia, in the business world. Has your leadership approach changed from one of those sectors to the other, or is it all sort of, do they all have the same common denominator?
Yeah, no, it changes a lot. And I think everyone knows you're going to change jobs and organizations a decent amount through your career. I remember when Bill Clinton was running, he kept talking about the importance of training, because at that time it was you're going to change your job 9 times during your career. Adaptability and continual learning and lifelong learning, all that's important. So the type of job where you're the advocate and you are fierce is very different than the type of job where you have the responsibility, to lead an organization. The Department of Human Services, which I left 30 years ago, I was the first director of it in the county. It was $400 million at the time with thousands of employees. You don't act the same way as a raging advocate does. And so you still want change. You can still be the critic of the system, but now you have responsibility to innovate and create that change. I'll give you an example. So I think it was 1990 or 91 or 92. First, President Bush had a competition to decrease Black infant mortality. And Pittsburgh had a terrible rate of children dying or not being delivered alive. What was at the heart of it? So we decided we're going to write that. I'm the head of the county human services. We bring in a lot of partners, which is always important if you want to bring about change. No one does it by themselves. Everyone needs lots of powerful partners. And we had a year-long planning process. And during the process, medical society wanted the leadership role. The hospital, the big hospital systems wanted the leadership role. The county health department that reported to me wanted the leadership role. The nonprofits that were prominent in the area wanted the leadership role. And we start thinking, well, what's the human behavior? Why are young moms not getting into prenatal care early and not taking the advice of the medical community? And it turns out they needed influence by people who they could trust. So we gave the money we created a community program and community coalitions, and it was the beautician and crossing guard and the sister-in-law, who were incentivized and organized to send these messages to the teen moms so that they would hear them versus the institutional people, the medical people, who were like tone deaf to them, and they in turn were tone deaf or afraid of those institutional people. So here's change, but not change from the outside forcing it in, but rather at the top, mobilizing people, getting partnerships, and then realizing that a lot of the solutions that are going to be proposed by the people who've been doing this forever, and Black infant mortality was still great, even though they were supposedly working on it forever. So this program was more, let's find the people who actually will be listened to and influence the individuals to change their behavior, to adapt these healthy behaviors and get into medical care. Well, we got the grant, which is a whole different story. I had to ask our local civic leader, Elsie Hillman, a billionaire, to go see the president directly and have us included as one of the 10 sites. They expanded it to 14 sites we were included. And at the end of 5 years, when it was evaluated by Mathematica, a renowned evaluation company, we were the top program in the country. We had reduced Black infant mortality by 50%, and a lot of the other indicator, babies, birth weight, etc.
Do you remember how you got to the beauticians and the crossing guards? How did you get to that grassroots level?
Yeah, so you convene the people who, first of all, they beat you up and they distrust you and say, you're just using us. You just want to get this money. And then you say, you learn to share. There was a woman, Maddie Woods, who I would hold these meetings in the county commissioner's conference room. And she was a citizen advocate and a leader in the Black community. She would scream at me and say, I don't trust you at all. If you talk to Maddie in the last 30 years, she'd say, boy, that was the best thing ever. They did share the decision making and they did share the funds with us and they believed in us.
Because the skepticism was real, right? It was based, I mean, where she's coming from as a citizen advocate had a lot of weight and a lot of roots and a lot of history, I'm sure, of
That's right.
failure or disappointment or whatever it was. So it made sense. You just were the next guy that she yelled at.
Yeah. And you have to okay, yeah, I understand that now. What will convince you? How do we develop a trusting relationship? How do I empower you? But you have to tell me what really works. And then she would come into the meetings and she would say, I forget the name of the person, but I'm going to say Evelyn. It wasn't. She had a particular person in mind. And she'd say, okay, enough with all the policy stuff. Let's think about Evelyn and think about her pregnancy. And she refocused us. And who will she be influenced by, et cetera. So a lot of it is questioning hard our human services approaches and thinking about the alternative, what will work, what innovations will work. And it's often think about the human behavior and how to change it.
It seems to me like also just the way you're describing that, like ultimately the difference was a delivery system, right? It was simply just figuring out the right, it's the, everyone's running the same program. Yours is ultimately has much better results. And it seemed because you had unlocked like the influence that was needed and delivered it that way, which got them, you know, the results that you were looking for, as opposed to like say a community down the road or a different state, which put up billboards or did other stuff and didn't see the results.
Yeah. Again, I'll go to this thing about power. So my career is both politics, which is, power to govern, and um, service to the community and justice. And so I understand a lot about power. In a lot of cases, we think power comes from the top, that it's hierarchical. And in fact, power comes from both the top and the bottom. It's the grassroots has to be there to influence the people at the top, who are often very difficult to influence. And then you need to be in top positions, whether it's in a nonprofit or government or a school or wherever, in order to have that power to actually try things and test things and eventually implement things. And to your point about new models are really important. We tried something as an alternative to child welfare. So my theory about child welfare at the time, and there was a lot of controversy, and our government deserved a lot of the criticism. But there was a theory that you know a person who's brought in because of suspected abuse or neglect is going to abide by the caseworker, the judge, the probation officer. And it didn't make any sense to me. Okay, there's a system that I had a leadership responsibility for. And that was one of the departments that reported to me. And so what did I think was an alternative to that? Well, that was, why don't you help people change their own behavior? And why don't you surround them with people who want to see good results for both the young parent and for the children? And so we started something called family support systems. And in this, I have to use my hands, but in the typical system, you have the caseworker, the judge, the probation officer, the authority telling down here, this person, you're not doing a good job with your children, you're hurting your children, whatever. And this is the system instead that we've created, where there are professionals encouraging, supporting, understanding the challenges that the individuals have and bringing them along. And wow, it was so powerful and so exciting. It still exists to some degree. But I know one of your questions to me was, where did you fail? I'd say my vision was that would overtake and become the prime model versus this law enforcement type oversight of people. I mean, obviously, you need that where children are going to be severely harmed, but where you can teach people and train people and encourage people, why not do that? It's more likely to last. And at the heart of it was questioning. And so I think this is important for nonprofit leaders to question how you're doing things. At the heart of it was this, how people are going to follow when they're told to follow. But none of us like an authority telling us what to do. No one does.
Ramey loves it. I've heard him say he loves being told what to do.
Yeah. Well, I know where he comes from. His mom is one of the nicest human beings I ever met, and it's part of my story too. In high school, after school, we would sit and talk about the world and values, and so that's like when I'm 16 years old, and now it's 60 years later, she's still, a great friend. The father, not so much.
He's all right. He's all right. When you look at the field today, and you started talking about this just now, and not, I don't want to position in terms of where you failed, but what do you wish more nonprofits did or did better? Or even to bring it down to the individual young professionals in the field, what do you wish they knew?
There's so many answers to that, Raimi. Yeah, I think you're going to have to zero it a little bit.
Okay. Let's try and put it this way. If I am a young rising star in a nonprofit, and I have to start motivating a team, or I have to start community organizing, what do you see something? What would you advise this person as he's trying to build a team, or he or she is trying to build a team, trying to get people to follow, trying to lead?
I think a key part of building the influence, power, the ability to change something is credibility. You start with achieving. It's a big word I would throw into this discussion. You achieve on something, and that achievement is something you didn't get there by accident. You said that was our goal. You organized to do it. You achieved it. Now all of a sudden, people say, oh, that person, that organization, they actually follow through. Okay. Now, sometimes it's not possible to achieve, and it's not the fault of the leader, et cetera. But so now you have a predicate, and people are starting to have both confidence in you, and you're starting to have confidence in yourself and competence. And then you build it in the next thing that you do, and gives you more of that leadership aura and that leadership sense internally. And then that builds and builds and builds. Some of it's innate. Some people are never going to be leaders. That's just not there. They're good people, but leadership isn't their thing. Other people have this as a possibility. And like any other skill or competency, it withers if you don't use it, and it can strengthen. That muscle can strengthen if you do use it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm curious if that's something you're seeing as you look at the landscape right now. Are you seeing a lack of leadership? Are you seeing great leadership? What are you seeing in the field today?
Generally, I think nonprofits are struggling. I call it the triple whammy. They have more people in need, less contributions, and less government funding. And that's been going on for some time. And so it's a leadership role in a time of scarcity. And so that requires a different type of leader. I think there are too many nonprofits. I think we often mistake good intentions, good aspirations, for a worthy organization. Again, I think achievement is really important, and being able to demonstrate and prove your value so that you can get those resources, you can get the partners, you can get some more influence. And a lot of nonprofits should just say, we should merge, we should support somebody else, we should close down, etc.
If you thought the other answers you said were controversial, that last thing is going to really set some people because
Why?
because not that I totally agree with you. And I've said it out loud. I'll tell you a quick story. Years ago, I was working in a nonprofit. There were two organizations that were similar in nature to what we were doing, and I was like, "This is silly. Let's figure this out. Let's figure out how we can all work together, right?" So I brought the leadership together. We had this conversation, and they said, "Who's going to be president?"
Mhm.
I was like, "Is that our problem?" They said, "Yeah. Which one of us is going to be president of the board?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is not going to happen." So it didn't, because that idea that was like a power thing, or I don't know, an honor thing, which I thought was crazy, but just because you raised it. So the whole merger shutdown concept as a thing is not so much a thing.
Yeah. So let me address that first. Mergers, they're extremely hard. Uh, we created the County Department of Human Services. I forget, 10, 11, 12 different departments all in one. Let's coordinate. Let's work on common goals, etc. It was like pulling teeth. It was extremely hard. If I didn't have the force of the chief elected official, the head of the county government behind me, we wouldn't have started it. And now, 30 years later, more than 30 years later, it still exists, and it's more unified than ever. There's still those turf battles. nonprofits. I actually merged our United Way with United Ways from 3 other counties. It was nearly impossible. I can go on. So yes, you're right about mergers, but I would say about nonprofit leadership, or actually not actually necessarily the leaders, but the board members, the key staff people, everyone has to think about this. Are we actually achieving what we want to achieve? And do we have a future? My mantra was face the facts and make hard decisions. And if you don't have the resources, you don't have the people, you don't have the partners, let's move on. Let's not waste our time. Face the facts, make hard decisions. And if that means closing down part of your organization, all of your organization, merging with somebody else, going out of business, finding another job. Yeah, you should do it because maybe you'll be more successful and you'll achieve more. You'll reach your aim. Medicine.
Absolutely. Raymond, we've talked about this subject before, not necessarily in the podcast, but just in general, the idea that, you know, you're in a business to complete a mission, you have a goal, you have a purpose. And if you're not doing that, you shouldn't stay in business, right? You should do something else. Enough nonprofits could disappear and nobody would notice, and perhaps more might get accomplished if there were not as many as there are, because they're holding weight just to have jobs as opposed to doing something.
I think one test that I use all the time, and again, it's probably trite and oversimplified, but I like to innovate and I like people who work with me to innovate. You get a lot of ideas, and how do you evaluate whether those ideas should be pursued? And so I always thought of this 3-point test. One, is this objective really important? And you find there's so many things you want to do are really important. So that's the easiest of the test. But you can sort what's most important, what's less important, etc. The second is, and this is really key, are we likely to succeed? Now, under this, there are a lot of things: finances, the staff resources, the partnerships, everything. But is there a likelihood, a reasonable likelihood, that we can achieve? So there are a lot of very good ideas that are very important to humanity or the community, but we're not really likely to succeed. We should not pursue that idea. And then the third thing is, okay, so we have a great idea. It's very important to our community. There's a likelihood we could succeed, not a certainty, but can we raise the resources? And resources can be a lot of things, but it's definitely money. It's sometimes grants, it's contributions, and it's people who will be at your side, people who stand up for you, partners, etc. And so this resources thing is, are people going, now I have this great idea and I think it could succeed, but are people really going to enlist? And so I think whatever the test is, that was my test. Other people may have a different test. You've got to be able to sort ideas into, yes, we should pursue them, or no, we shouldn't, or let's test it and then decide whether to pursue it.
Don't you think if you would have applied that test to some of your crazy ideas that you had when you were seeing the injustices that you saw, you would have shut them down, say, no, no, this can't be done, or people won't follow. But you still felt like you had to do it anyway.
Well, you asked 15 minutes ago whether I had, adapted in my leadership, through the years, and I think different positions that require different things. I think if you're the outsider and you're going to take all the risks, you're going to sue the state government repeatedly. You're going to criticize the governor, the secretaries of the departments. You're going to, use the media to expose what's happening under their watch. That's a whole different job than, being the head of an organization.
Did you go to Matt? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Brief. I'm fortunate that I could be both. And in my both government roles, leading government human services and nonprofits, I had a unexpected capacity to act as a business person, live within a budget, show your efficiency, keep your overhead down low. and continually show the people who are doubters about nonprofits and government that you can be efficient. I think that's an important part of leadership in both nonprofit and government. There's a lot of doubts about, only Elon Musk and the tech bros know how to do things, right? And only private industry can do things well. Wrong. But we have to, prove their distrust of us, their disrespect of us. Wrong. We have to show that we can be efficient and we can be effective.
Such a good answer. I'm curious. I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. It's a long career. It's many years. Did a lot of things that a lot of people know about. Something that you did that you accomplished that you're super proud about that no one knows about. It's hard to pull one out, but something either with an individual, with a program, with a project, whatever. I get no credit for it. No one even knows about it, perhaps even.
Yeah, so I'll give you two answers. One's general, and then one is more specific to a role that I played. So I think this applies to everyone as well. We're all made up differently, and we all respond differently to both applause and disdain. Probably built a wall around myself that said, don't take the praise seriously. It may have a motivation to it, or it may just be kind of superficial. And don't take the criticism too seriously, which is really hard, because what really counts is, did you measure up to your own yardstick? And I was always my own hardest critic, never satisfied with what I did. And so I know I was awkward when people praised me. And I know I might have seemed indifferent when people criticized me. But I needed to keep moving forward. And the only way I could do that was to not be content with my own achievements. Again, maladjustment from childhood.
But before you get specific, was the other side of that also true? If the criticism came, you also built the wall because sometimes you didn't believe it or sometimes you couldn't believe it so that you could always keep moving forward?
I think I internalized it and thought about it, but I just realized you're going to keep moving forward throughout your entire career. You better not get slowed down by either the halo or the arrows being thrown at you. So the other answer to your question was something that other people don't know about. Part of my roles in leadership were sometimes to be the confidant and key advisor to a chief elected official or the head of the State Department of Human Services. It was then called the Welfare Department. Or I worked for a federal judge closing down on a famous case called the Pennhurst case in eastern Pennsylvania near Philadelphia on the rights of people to live in the community. In all of those instances, the private discussions, the guidance to those key decision makers, the people who had the power, no one ever knew those stories. I haven't told very many of the stories. There's one funny story where the parents in the Philadelphia area some of them are resistant to moving the individuals from, which was again 3,000 residents, and all the horrors and all the exposés, TV and news and others have been made about it. And we sue in federal court, and now I'm working actually for the judge on the lawsuit. And he says, well, how are we going to deal with this? Some of the families are resisting it, putting up great public pressure. And he said, he asked two of us to come back with a plan. We came back with a plan. It was, okay, Your Honor, we think you should hold the Secretary of Welfare, the head of the department, in contempt of court. And we think you should bring the hammer down on the counties who are slowing down this process. And he got up, he walked around his desk, and he said, you guys are wrong. We're going to create pre-placement visits. We're going to let the family members see the individuals in the community in settings that are individualized, customized just for their son or daughter, brother or sister. And we're going to let them pull them back and put them back in the institution if that isn't better. And your job is make it better. And we left that day, we realized we had stupidly used the hammer, which I told you the stories earlier in our discussion today, usually doesn't work. And instead, let's find the ways to persuade and influence.
Amazing. Amazing, amazing. I have one last question on my list. I'll get you out of here on this. And I think it might be the most important question I'm going to ask you this whole time. That is Steelers, Pirates, or Penguins?
That's not a question.
It's really not a question. I know the answer even before you answer it.
Sports is important in my life, and I've loved it, and I think we can sometimes get inspired in our nonprofit work with people who we see achieving at a very great level. In my case, I grew up we had a stadium called Forbes Field, and we had a right fielder, Clemente. Um, he ran faster, threw the ball better, hit the ball better than almost anyone in the history of baseball. And you watched him and you saw that the joy of that achievement and the excitement. And so sometimes I think those things in other parts of our lives can, in fact, influence us. I think Pittsburgh still has more Super Bowl trophies. Steelers still have more Super Bowl trophies than anyone else. No one else has more, is what I mean.
Clemente was a pretty fierce and passionate advocate for justice as well.
So diminished as a Mets, Knicks, and Jets fan. I'm like, this is like a disaster for me to even have this conversation.
It's interesting, though. First of all, our sports are not nonprofits anymore. Teaching young people from early in life through sports is, I think, a way to bring out some leadership. You're going to see whether you're a leader on the basketball court or the baseball field, and you're going to see it in the playground. And I think that would be something else I would point to. We learn early in our lives whether we have that interest and that capacity. And in my case, there was a community program at what was then called the Iron Kaufman Center. It was the Jewish Community Center. And they saw me as a leader, and they took me all over the Midwest to training programs. So, once you have this in you and you know that you're a leader in certain natural situations, and then people start pointing that out, and then you become leaders of organizations and you do pretty well with them, and you build confidence, and then all of a sudden, and people say, okay, and we're going to invest in you, we're going to believe in you. And that's really important in leadership development, is having people who believe in you.
Absolutely.
Do you look at the younger leaders now? You're not in it now professionally, but I'm sure you still pay attention to the field. So do you look at younger leaders in your area, people who took over for you in the different roles, and how do you think about them in terms of leadership? Is it a generational thing? Does it change in the sense of how you adaptive leadership, that changes and the model changes? Are they weaker? Are they stronger? Are they better? How do you think about younger leaders now in this space?
Well, I think one of my avocations in retirement is supporting, and in some cases, the individuals would say mentoring. So these, I know I'm not going to bring about the change, and so you have to look at them. I would say the area that I would most, cut to an answer here at the end. The area I would most develop, if I had a magic wand, would be youth leadership. It would be helping young people in high school and college and early adulthood to see that they can be the change in the world. In the 1960s, we thought we were the generation that was going to change the world. And wars, poverty, racism, hatred, etc. Now, don't ask me to answer whether we were, because it's embarrassing. But in some cases, we made great success, like the area of disability rights that I was talking about. But I think investing in young people and opening their eyes to how they can change the world, learning about nonprofits and government and policies and partnerships and how to be leaders, that would be the one thing that I would do if I could. And I encourage, there's a couple of programs who I love and I support, because that's what they do.
Right?
Amazing. All right, Bob, we're going to leave it there. I had a million more questions. I got to be honest. So because it's a super interesting subject, and and you have a lot more, I think, to share. So perhaps we'll get an opportunity to do this again at some point in the future. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll talk soon again.
Yeah, let's hope there's a lot of success for our nonprofit leaders in the future.
Amen to that. Thank you.
Thanks.